This is going to be the tier list for PVE. Tier listing PVE is kind of hard just because there's so much different PVE content. All of these units are largely doing completely different pieces of content. So then what makes a unit good in PVE? How do we compare them? To me, it's a mix of a few things. One is how flexible they are. Some units can be used in multiple places. This doesn't apply to a lot of units, but it's a bit of a bonus if they're used in multiple roles. Also, whether or not they are best in slot in their content, meaning, is this just the best possible option you have? Is there going to be an upgrade or not? If they're best in slot, then that helps a lot. You also have to look at how big of a drop-off is it to the next best replacement. Because let's say there is a unit that is just really, really good at a specific piece of content. If the drop-off to the next replacement is like a 3-star that does 90% of the job, and you clear it fine anyways, then this unit might be a little bit lower of a priority. Also, we need to look at how important is the content that we're doing. Not all content is equal. Some things are just more important to do than others. Like if there is a unit that is bad everywhere except for Automaton Tower, they're the best Automaton Tower unit in the game, completely useless everywhere else, that unit is still pretty bad because you can do Automaton Tower to pretty much anything. So let's start looking at the units. First up is Tamarin. Tamarin, insane PvE healer of course, free in connections. She's pretty much the GOAT PvE healer. She does Abyss, Episode, Nightmare Queen, Normal Cycle, Fire Expedition, Dark Expedition, Ice Expedition, and you can also use her in Earth Expedition until you get the upgrades. You can also use her for a bunch of hunts. She does it all. There's not too much to say about her. She just is the best healer. And then we have Brieg. Brieg is pretty similar. You get him for free in the Wyvern Challenge. You use him in Wyvern. You can use him in Fire Expedition, Ice Expedition, Light Expedition, Dark Expedition. And he is also used in Episode. You can use him. It's like, especially when you're early game, you can just toss him in there and it's fine. You use him in Normal Cycle as well as Nightmare Carcanus. So yeah, both of these two just have so much flexibility and you get them for free, so they're definitely the top two. And then Fenny is right after them in my opinion. She is just a really, really good DPS with also some healing on her S1. She's used in, right now, Rift, but Rift is going away soon. Even after Rift, she's still the best in slot DPS for Fire Expedition and Dark Expedition. She is also really good in Nightmare Carcanus, and I haven't tested it yet, but I'm pretty sure she would be really good in Nightmare Queen. I don't see why she wouldn't be. She also has a setup in Nightmare Julie, though it does require an NMO5. That's 3 different Nightmare raids you can use her in, though you would have to pick one, just because you can't reuse units in Nightmare Raid. And she is also usable in Light Expedition, though I think with her getting sealed, it's not as good, but she's definitely usable. So these are the top 3. These 2 are free, this one's a banner unit, but probably the first unit you should look to story summon once it's available. Now let's take a look at the A tier. This is a mixture of units, and you'll notice pretty much all of these are free units or 3 stars. These units are best in slot for a couple of places, or they are just used somewhere and are really cheap to build, so it's worth building them. Mercedes, you can use her in Earth Expedition, she's the best DPS there. And then also Nightmare Vera, she's also the best DPS there, or AoE DPS there. As well as Normal Cycle, you can use her in a ton of places. Especially since we get her for free at the start of the game. You can just use her as a generic DPS attack buffer in so many places, plus she scales into the end game, being best in slot for 2 different pieces of content that you run frequently. So easily a very top of A tier unit to me. There's also Commander Lorena. Commander Lorena you can get in connections, do her specialty change. Insane single target DPS for Abyss. You also use her in Fire Expedition and also either Nightmare Queen or Nightmare Arahakan. You have to pick one because you can't reuse units. But she is also just really, really nice to build. Next up is Isaria. Isaria is kind of a unit that mostly just bridges your early and mid game into end game, I think. Once you actually hit end game, she's not used in too many places. It's really only Nightmare Queen where she ends up getting used. But you still can use her as like an early unit for Dark Expedition. Use her in Abyss. You can use her in Story and Normal Cycle. So she does a lot of things. She's not really best in slot any of them except for Nightmare Queen. But she is free, so definitely worth a pickup. And sometimes it's some harder content, like every once in a while Advent rolls around and I end up using Isaria again for free-to-play comps. So definitely still a very good unit. Mascot Hazel, insane. buffer and healer for fire-based teams. It's just her ability to give people greater attack buff plus the free 10% attack is very, very nice. She's going to be best in slot for Nightmare Vera, and also if you aren't using Kana in your Earth Expedition, she's going to be the best in slot healer. She is also sometimes used in Advents, just because if you end up using a fire team, she's going to be your best DPS increase. Very worth building. You do have to roll for it, because they removes her from connections, but very, very good unit. There's also Surmia. Surmia is the best in slot DPS for Light Expedition, and you can use her as an early DPS in Dark Expedition until you start picking up some other options like Fene. Also, she is just a unit with very, very high attack, self-greater attack buff, and high DPS. Means that you can use her here and there in some frequent content, like Advent or Hall of Trials. Sometimes she pops up here and there. Definitely a very good unit, and she's free in the Golem challenges as well. Then we have Camilla. Camilla is kind of similar to Asaria. She does a lot of things, and she's not necessarily best in slot at them, but she is free, and she works. You can use her in Fire Expedition, Dark Expedition, as well as Light Expedition. She is also really good for Abyss, because a lot of the later Abyss lures, you end up using dual attack based comps, and Camilla has her forced dual attack, especially on manual. You have permanent uptime on your attack buff unless you get stripped, and she also has a Death Break as well to help add more Death Break consistency. So very, very good unit, especially being 3-star, very cheap to invest in as well. Next up is Adventurer Ross. He is also insanely strong on manual play because with his S2 Soul Burn, you can just spam that. And in Abyss later, dual attack comps, or just pushing episode, or even in a Nightmare cycle, anytime you have to manual, Ross is really, really strong. He's also, at the moment of this video, pretty good in PvP. So this is a PvE only tier list, I'm just mentioning it. In terms of where he's best in slot, there's not really too many places. He's best in slot in the later Abyss stages because of his S2 Soul Burn, but for other PvE content, use him in Earth Expedition until you decide to, if you ever get the upgrade in Cecilia. He's gonna be the best knight you can use besides her. You can also use her, or use him to a pretty good extent in Nightmare. Either Arhakon or Vera, especially Vera in Phase 3, where spamming dual attacks makes her a lot weaker. Ross has plenty of those. And then Arhakon, he's just able to give your DPS another turn to do damage pretty much. It's a very, very good unit. Zealot Carmine Rose and Verdant Adden are both kind of similar. They're mainly here for Light Expedition. Zealot Carmine Rose has the bonus of also being pretty good for Nightmare Vera as the DPS, because she has her own debuffs, and Phase 2 does want a decent amount of debuffs, so she makes Phase 2 really consistent with all of her debuff output. Both of these are for Light Expedition, just with Zealot Carmine Rose also doing Nightmare Vera, which is why I have her a little bit higher. Both of these are 3-star, so very cheap to pick up. And the Verdant Adden is also mostly pretty much completely free. Terranar Guard, we have him here. Only really for Abyss. He is usable in Fire Expedition, but Commander Lorena and Fene both do the job just as well. So there's not too much of a reason to use him in Fire Expedition unless you just really like him. But he tears through the last 24 floors of Abyss, most of them anyways. So very worth to pick up, being only a 3-star, so very cheap to invest in. Now we have our B tier. These units are best in slot somewhere. I would say a little bit not as generally strong as the ones above them. Archdemon Shadow is, I only have her down here so people are hopefully less tempted to roll for her, because the thing about ML5s and PvE is they are not really necessary. Archdemon Shadow in terms of strength is probably here above Camilla, but I have her down here because her usage is kind of overkill. So she is the best dual attacker in the game. It's not even close. The only thing that comes close is Camilla with Benimaru's Tachi, a limited collab artifact rather, and even then that's still dependent on you not getting debuffed, so you would need 200 F-Res or something. Archdemon Shadow, you can slap her into PvE content on her PvP build, turn her skills off, and she will dual attack with your highest attack ally every single turn with 0 conditions attached. She doesn't have Death Break, but with Brieg existing, that doesn't really matter. She's insane for Fire Expedition and Dark Expedition, and no one's really tested it, because most people aren't going to have Archdemon Shadow while they're doing Abyss, but she's probably insane in Abyss as well. It's also usable in Light Expedition, just she takes 30% extra damage, and then also elemental disadvantage, so she's kind of going to explode. A bit hard to keep her alive there, especially since you also need damage to heal up. But because you can already one-shot Fire and Dark Expedition pretty easily even without her, she's a little bit overkill despite being best in slot in those roles. If you have her though, you can literally just use her PvP build, so there's no reason to not use her if you have her. But again, I kept her down here a little bit just to not have her be the only ML5 in the top 2 tiers, because you really don't need to roll her, she's just nice to have. There's also Arbiter of Eldred. Arbiter of Eldred is just very nice, especially for early game. He clears like pretty much all of the early content just by himself. And then later on, when you're farming a stage that's easy to kill, like Eulogy of a Saint, his S3 easily wipes out the waves. Plus he has his PvP usage, just nuking things. So, very nice, and he's free from the Moonlight Blessing, and easily the best choice from there, so he gets a mention here. We have these three, which are just the Wyvern 3, and I mean, they're just here because you get them for free and you're kind of forced to build them anyways. They're only good in that role in Wyvern, but Wyvern is very important to farm, so they definitely deserve their spot here, I think. Sigrid is the only one that gets used in a little bit more places. Her S2 into S3 combo is super strong. Sometimes you use her in Advents. There's also the Zeo one-shot where you use her. And also, if you decide to start doing Wyvern one-shot, she's going to be probably your best Wyvern one-shot DPS, because Rem is the upgrade and she's a collab unit. But this is the Wyvern 3. Now we have Loka and Inos. These two are for expeditions. Loka is one of the best debuffers slash supports for Ice Expedition. Works very well against ice units, and also if your DPS is green. Though Inos also ends up working pretty well, especially when you're using her with Fene. And I also use Inos a bit in my Nightmare Hakan. So I put these two together. They're kind of just expedition units. Inos is usable in a lot of expeditions. I've seen people use her in Fire, Dark, and also Ice. But she isn't necessarily like best in slot, she's just an option for them, so I don't have her any higher than that, even in spite of her being flexible. We also have Angelic Montmorency. She is not as good as she used to be because, well, they removed her from connections, and now we get Brieg for free very early, so you kind of just tank your Wyvern with Brieg now, but she does still have her uses. Like, she is still a pretty good consistent cleanser. We can use her in Nightmare Carcass. She's going to be the best option there as our healer. And anytime you need cleanse, really, she's just nice to have. So she's here for Nightmare Carcass, easy to get, easy to build, pretty cheap, and also pretty much the best in slot healer for Nightmare Carcass. Now we have Suthin, ML3. He is the best in slot debuffer for Nightmare Hakan, whether you're manualing it or autoing it. He's going to be the best in slot. 3-turn cooldown on his S3 with 2 burns and an unhealable. I've used them in a couple of other places, like in Hall of Trials, just because that's 3 debuffs with 100% proc rate. Ends up being useful sometimes, but being the most accessible option and also cheap for Nightmare Hakan while being best in slot, that's why I have him up here pretty much. We also have Destina and Ray. These two, you only need one of them really. I think Ray is better than Destina in terms of just being a PvE healer, but Destina is a little bit more like usable elsewhere. These are for Nightmare Juleeve because you need some sort of cleansing there, and Destina's cleansing is a little bit subpar to be honest, but depending on your team, you can get by with just Destina's subpar cleansing and just blasting through the fight with just raw damage. While Ray is a lot stronger, but he is also locked to only being PvE. Not that Destina is very good in PvP either, but she is somewhat usable in low levels at least. So these are just pick one to use as your healer for Nightmare Juleeve. We also have Midnight Gaul Lilius, who is the best in slot DPS for Nightmare Juleeve. There are replacements, but the problem is you need at least 2 DPS. Sometimes you just be going for 3. So even if there are replacements, you need 2 of them to replace her. And all of her replacements are going to be 5 stars. The only free 5-star replacement is Vivian, but Vivian's probably like the worst one of all the usable DPS. So it's a little bit hard to replace her, really, which is why I have her a tier higher than all of the other Nightmare Raid units. Despite her having replacements, they're all the same rarity, so... She is limited, though, so she is a little bit rare, technically. That's been like all Lilius. She's just the Nightmare Julie DPS, and you can one-shot Banshee 13 with her. There's a few units above her, but if you don't have them, then she's plenty usable for Banshee 13 one-shot. Angel of Light Angelica, Nightmare Queen, support. She's very, very nice, non-attack, AoE, unbuffable. And Strip is very useful for when you're clearing through Nightmare Queen. It makes it pretty fast, too. She's here just because Queen is the most important of the Nightmare Raid bosses, but her replacement is right here, Arowell. Angelica's a lot better, but Arowell gets the job done, especially once you clear it once. It's a lot faster to just get to the boss now, so... She isn't any higher above Suthin or anything, it's just because her replacement is, like, pretty close, so... Then these three are the only expedition-like ones here, actually, for one-shots. These three units allow you to one-shot your expedition, just clear it in one entry. You don't need all three of them. I think any combination of two of them lets you one-shot your expeditions. It'll just be a bit more inconsistent without all three of them. The reason why the other one-shot expedition units aren't here is because they are less of an upgrade in my opinion. Like, I think Earth is the one where you definitely need at least one of these three to start one-shotting. So that's why I have them a little bit higher, and all three of them are pretty usable in Nightmare Raid as well. Mostly just in Era. So Cecilia can be used in Archon if you really want to. So now we have the C tier. This tier is alternatives to some best in slot options, or they're best in slot but not really a massive upgrade, so I have them a bit lower, or they are just best in slot at pretty low prio content. So we have Free Spirit Tieria. She is the best, or she is the alternative to Arbiter Vildred. She also has an AoE skill that resets on kill. It's just, she does a bit less damage than him, and also has no PvP usage. It's just because we already use Arbiter as our ML5, and we're going to have him built anyways, so there's not too much of a reason to build Free Spirit Tieria. She does also have her usage as a Wave 1 AoE into Wave 2 Deathbreak in Banshee 13 one-shot, which is nice, especially given that she's free. There's a couple of other units for that slot, but she's free and doesn't cost anything in terms of bolas to enhance, so a little bit better than the alternatives, despite being... It's better, she's better because she doesn't cost anything and she gets the job done, despite being a bit lower in damage potential. We also have Doris and Acades. These two I'm just going to group together. They're kind of just healers that get used here and there in PvE. They're also pretty cheap to build. You can use them in Nightmare Raid, mostly. Maybe some early Abyss you might use Acades, but it's mostly just a Nightmare cycle. You have a chance to use them in Archon. And then Unbound Knight ROL is the Angel of Light Angelica replacement for Nightmare Queen. And for her, it's really just... Queen asks for a lot of strip. The problem is Arowell's strip is on her S3. Her S1 is kind of RNG, though she does provide escort, which is a decent bit of protection, even if you don't manage to strip both buffs with your S1. And AOL also has unbuffable. So no unbuffable on ROL, plus AOL is non-contact, or it's a non-attack skill, so even if you miss your strip, you're not going to get countered or anything. So AOL is definitely better, but ROL is 3-star. Easier to get, still an ML3, so a little bit hard. But easier to get compared to AOL, and she gets the job done, so we have her here. Especially because of how important it is to be able to clear Nightmare Queen. It's going from 2 to 5 tokens instead of 2 to 3. Next up is Vivian. Vivian, you get her for free from the Banshee Challenge. Use her for Banshee 13 one-shot, use her for Golem 13 one-shot, and a very budget DPS option for Nightmare Julie. She is also used in the Zeo one-shot, though she doesn't really need any enhancement for that, besides just her EE. So pretty nice unit to have, and I mean she's free. There's also Bologna right after her. Bologna is used in Banshee 13 one-shot as one of the possible options. There's 3 units that are better than her, but she kills Banshee 13 very easily already. Like, 3 units better than her are like kind of overkilling it, if anything. Plus, you can use her for either Nightmare Julie or Nightmare Archon. So, pretty good unit just because of her flexibility. Euphine is the best Banshee 13 one-shot DPS nuker, but that's also why, like I mentioned, she's kind of overkilling it. It's insane how easy it is to one-shot Banshee 13 with her. Like, this was the Euphine I used for testing, and she is on, like, complete garbage gear with not even a max tail cutter, and not having her 6th awaken, and she still just obliterated it. So if you have her, she's just completely overkill for the fight, but she's very, very good there, so definitely worth mentioning. Next up is Straze. Straze, yes, he can one-shot all of the hunts. The only ones that really matter are going to be Banshee and maybe Golem. You'll notice all of the Banshee one-shot units are up here. That's just because Banshee, of the 3 main hunts, Wyvern, Golem, and Banshee, Banshee's the biggest pain to clear when you're doing it slow, so one-shotting it is the priority, especially when you are, well, it's not very hard to one-shot. I also forgot to mention Bellona. Her Loka also gets used for Bellona, though she does need a completely different build. It is worth mentioning that Loka is used with Bellona as her support for Banshee one-shot. And I'm also realizing that I forgot to put A-Lots in here, so 1 second. Okay, and also Auxiliary Lots is another choice for Bellona. So Loka's more accessible, it's just because she also requires a completely different build that I have Loka higher and A-Lots down here. So that's the Banshee squad. There's also Cerise and Chloe. These two are a little bit awkward that they're so far apart, but these two are your upgrades for Light Expedition. It's a bit hard to make your Light Expedition one-shot consistent until you use either one of these, because the Light Expedition one-shot team is going to be Sermia, Camilla, Brieg, and then one of Carmine Rose or Adin, so the consistency is not fantastic. Swapping out Camilla for either Cerise or Chloe does a lot for your consistency. It's just because they are 5-star, and only used in Light Expedition that you might be wary of building them, so they are a little bit lower. And then this entire grouping here is the Wyvern 13 gang. Let's talk a little bit about them. So Wyvern 13, Sigelica is necessary. She is just the best option for Wyvern 13 one-shots, giving speed buff and attack buff to everybody, plus a dual attack with Death Break on her S1. Very insane unit. And then we also have our Wave 1 AoEs to clear the wave. There's Clarissa, Seaside Bellona, and Arya, who is down here. These 3 have varying differences. SSB is the easiest one to gear. She does the most damage on her S3, and then with her being such high damage, you can actually run Daydream Joker on her and just add more damage to your one-shot. You can also give her effectiveness, since you have a lot of leftover stats to work with typically, giving her a chance to, if you're using Rem, because Rem has a chance to wipe out Wave 1 with her counter, you might have a chance to S2 on Wave 2 with your SSB, or you can give her some sort of Deathbreak artifact for more consistency. There's also Clarissa. Clarissa is technically the best one. She is just very hard to gear. In terms of top potential, she's definitely better than SSB for one-shotting, or for Wave 1 AoE and Wyvern. That's just because she actually adds to your win rate if you're using Sigrid. She's the only one of the 3 that increases your win rate when you're using Sigrid. So she is very hard to gear. It's just if you can hit those gear requirements, she is easily better than both of these. And Arya is pretty much the budget option. She is not really that useful in PvE. She's only really used here or as a potential 4th slot in Nightmare Carcanus. Nightmare Carcanus, we already have Brieg, Montmorency, and then one of Fene, or where is she? Shu? Where'd she go? Here. Shu as DPS. So this 4th slot can be filled by like 10 different units. Arya, Diane, Amelia, Ran. There's also like Ida, Luluka. Just because there's so many slots for this last role, I don't really value being that 4 slot unit very highly. And then for Wyvern 13 one-shot, she's worse than both of these. It's just, she's a little bit more accessible than SSB due to not being a limited unit. And also she's easier to gear than Clarissa, so she does have her use as a Wyvern 13 Wave 1 clear. It's just one-shotting Wyvern 13 in general isn't that important. because the starter team they give you of Sigrid, Furious, Mui, and Brieg is already like a little bit over 2 minutes clear on like proper gear, and also has like a 99% one-shot rate, or consistency clear rate rather, since they give you Song of Stars for free on Furious. So it's not too important to one-shot Wyvern, honestly. And then Ken is the Deathbreaker. He is just the best one. 100% chance of Deathbreak on his S2 plus a dual attack from the unit. It's better than Camilla, because Camilla's the replacement, or at least she's the replacement for Rump teams. She only has a 50% chance of Deathbreak on her S1, though she does bring a duel. If you're using Sigrid, then we can't use Camilla because Sigrid has no Deathbreak on her S1, so the replacement is down here, Karin. Karin's just a lot worse than Ken, though, because Ken doesn't need any molas. He's bringing a dual attack. Like, his damage is your Sigrid's damage, while Karin needs a lot more investment. If you want her to actually do damage on her Deathbreak with her S3, you have to actually invest in her, which kind of sucks. Ken, you could just slap in there level 50, 5-star Awaken with his EE. That's why Ken's up here. We also have Soul and Shadow Rose that I'm mentioning just for Golem one-shot. Golem one-shot's honestly also not that important, just because it's very easy to clear Golem. Like, so many of these free units are insane in Golem. Cameron, Mercedes, Sermia, Ross is already like 100% clear for Golem, like just a few days in. There's also some other units like Mascot Hazel, Zealot Carmine, Rose, or Ball and Sezen. Probably these two, haven't tried them, but I imagine Cecilia is very good too, just for Golem. And it's like, not that important, especially because a lot of your Golem gear you're kind of just getting from Rift anyways. But Soul is very funny because with any sort of like decent TPS set, you could run a 3-star Awakened level 50 Soul with no molas and he's going to one-shot Golem. It's very trivial. If he actually costs more to invest in, I'd have him lower, but just because level 50 3-star Awakened with no molas is a very cheap investment for being able to one-shot Golem. And then Shadow Rose is just the best in slot for the Golem support Deathbreak role, so that's why she's up here. Now we have a lot of these units here are mostly for Nightmare Cycle. Afternoon Soak Fawn is the best in slot DPS for Nightmare Vera. The only reason she's down here and not higher up is because Zealot Carmine Rose gets the job done pretty well. It was a lot cheaper to invest in, though. Of course, Flan is absurdly good in PvP, but this is a PvE tier list, so if we're looking just at PvE, I think she's kind of all the way down here. Because besides Vera, there's not really that many like valuable places she's good in. I use her on Automaton Tower, but I've mentioned already, Automaton Tower does not matter. Like, we do not treat that as valuable content. The thing for Flondo is she makes autoing Nightmare Vera very, very trivial. Like, you can just do Flan, Hazel, Mercedes, plus Ball and Sezen. That's an auto team. The only thing is it's a bit of a damage check, but it shouldn't be that bad to pull off. And autoing, I also don't count as very high value content, just because you're saving 5 minutes of manual gameplay once a month. So it's kind of like, is that really that important? Not really. We have Diane and Amelia as two potential healers that you can use for Nightmare Carcass in that 4th slot role that I mentioned. There's also Elena, who's also there, but I have her a little bit lower just because Diane and Amelia have a bit more usage elsewhere in PvE. Just Amelia with her S1 or her S2 CR push and attack buff ends up being useful here and there, and then Diane with all of her buffs is usable here and there in Abyss. So it's these two are some options for Nightmare Carcass and potentially other places that would be pretty niche. Shu is the alternative DPS for Fene. Fene does get sealed, but you only need 15 extra crit chance to hit 100 with Fene. Shu is here just as the second best DPS option for Nightmare Carcass, and also if you decide to use your Fene in, say, Queen or Nightmare Jewel Leave, then you would have Shu as a DPS that you can still use. Bran is the best 4th slot Carcass unit if you're manualing. Just his S2 strip, or his S2 gives immunity to everybody, which is nice. Then his S3 as the AoE strip plus Deathbreak is also really nice. So that's why he's up here. He's technically the best in that 4th slot. It's just same thing like I've said a bunch of times, because that 4th slot isn't that valuable. He's not any higher despite being the best in that role. We also have Laya, Bernard as two potential supports you could use in your Nightmare Jewelleaf team. You definitely want one of Destina or Ray, and then at least 2 DPS, and that 4 slot can be a DPS, or it can be a support like this, another cleanser slash healer. You also double up on Destina or Ray. But these two are here just in that support slash, yeah, the support role. Laya also does have her cooldown decrease on her S2 plus dual attack on S1. Makes her a little bit stronger. And then there's Fenris and Celine. Celine might be a little bit high actually, but Fenris is just in that secondary DPS slot for Nightmare Jewelleaf. If you don't have Gaul Lilius, Fenris might be the... I'm not sure if he's the second best DPS or it's Bellona, but he's a pretty solid DPS. You can also use him to one-clear Ice Expedition, but that's not really relevant when Fene also does it. So yeah, him being able to one-clear Ice Expedition isn't very relevant right now, I think. And he can one-shot Banshee, but there's better units like Euphine, Bellona, Straze, and Gala all do it better. So that's also not really that much of a factor. It's just he's here as a potential DPS for Nightmare Jewelleaf. Same with Celine. She is only used in Nightmare Jewelleaf, but she does work on her PvP build. You swap her to DDJ and just make her go do damage. Then there's Tenebria. Tenebria is the ball replacement. If you don't have Ball and Session, Tenebria is the next best. The most important place, I think, of the places that these two cover is Earth Expedition, and she is considerably worse than him in Earth Expedition, in my opinion. Her speed down being on her S2 and not her S3 means that when you start the fight, the boss is going to have a lot more time without speed down on him, since you have to have Tenebria take 2 turns to land it. And there's also the problem of her debuffs being on 2 separate skills, means that when you use Edika's, she is much more susceptible to RNG, because Ball just needs to proc Edika's once every other turn. Tenebria needs to proc Edika's once every other turn, but she has to do it like... It's after she uses S3, it's once every other turn, and then after she uses S2, it's once every other turn. So she has to proc it more times. You can have overlapping turns where if you proc it, it'll reduce both of the cooldowns. But it's definitely a lot more susceptible to RNG, so I think she's much lower. They're also both using Nightmare Vera, but Nightmare Vera, the context with which you use them is like, you don't really... It's not that big of a deal, I think. So, yeah. Even though she's better than him for Nightmare Vera, I have her down here just because I don't think Nightmare Vera is like that hard to clear in the first place. And she does have usage here and there in Abyss, but you can clear all of Abyss without her. Alots I mentioned earlier, he's just the support for Bellona and Banshee 13 one-shot. Leo is also a Banshee 13 one-shot support. He takes Free Spirit's Tyria's role, and he's slightly better than her because his S2 has a chance to extra hit, so you can apply, or you can double apply artifacts like Elegate Candle or Miss Confile, and also he has an attack imprint, so a little bit of a damage boost. But you do need to Mola his S2 in order to reach 100% death break rate, so that's why he is down here, just because of the Mola investment. We've also got Spectre Tenebria, who acts as a potential DPS for a few pieces of content. Use her here and there in Abyss, though she is replaceable in every single floor. You also use her for Nightmare cycle, mainly Nightmare Queen or Nightmare Archon, though again, it's clearable without her in both of those spots. Sid is here, and he is probably going to end up here after Fene releases, or after her Story Summon releases, because Fene can just do Ice Expedition, like he's not really needed. But she is a gacha unit, and her Story Summon's not available yet. So we'll just have him here. He's pretty much your budget option for clearing Ice Expedition. Or your DPS, rather. And then these 3, or these 4, is like the Bruiser Gang, kind of. Immortal Wukong, not good anymore for Rift, now that we rotated out of Earth Rift, but he does still have some usage in Nightmare cycle. Nightmare Jewelleaf, he's the best one if you're autoing it. Like I said, auto is pretty low value content, but also even if you're not autoing it, he does work as a, I guess, a somewhat passable DPS there. His damage isn't really that good. It's mainly just in the B phase because he's a full AoE. He'll do more damage to the correct B that you're supposed to hit. And that means that when you're autoing it, at worst on your second B that you target, you're going to kill that one because it'll be lower HP by the time you kill the first one. And he also works for autoing Nightmare Archon as a substitute to Abyssal Euphine. Abyssal Euphine, she works for autoing Nightmare Archon and also Nightmare Queen. Uncrescent Bellona is also an option for Nightmare Archon and also Queen, or Nightmare Queen. I just think she's a bit worse than Abyssal Euphine. And also Navy Captain Landy, same thing, it's just autoing Queen. I'm not sure if she works in Archon, never tried her, but Archon, you definitely want these two, I think, just because they're full AoE. Now we are getting a little bit lower into the tier list. Mercenary Helga and Rowana, honestly, both of them are a little bit sad because their jobs kind of got taken by... It's really Brieg's fault. The best team for doing Ice Expedition used to be Mercenary Helga, Rowana, either Sid or Ram, and Loka. But now everybody just does Tamarin, Brieg, Loka, plus a DPS, which is going to be like Fene, or Tamarin, Brieg, Fene, Inos. So it's really Brieg's fault that these two are out of a job, but they do still work. And because I think the way their kits work, like Rowana is anti-extra attack, and also anti-counter, and Mercenary Helga is just very solid Death Break with attack buff, and also she is good in an Earth team. I think both of these units just have kits that work in a way that they have potential to be better in future PvE content. So I just have them here at the top of D tier, even though they're kind of jobless right now. Wanda, very, very niche. It's just when you're doing Straze one-shot, if your damage, or Straze one-shot for Banshee 13, if your damage is not very, very good, Wanda has target on her S2, plus you can give her Song of Stars. That is 2 chances to apply target, and very good consistency. Biblis and Crimson Armin, both of these are here only for Nightmare Queen auto, but they are only used in Nightmare Queen auto. And how important is Nightmare Queen auto? You've heard me say it, not very, because you're saving 5 minutes of manualing once a month, and you have to roll a limited 5-star, which you can only get from custom group summons, which means you have to pass up other better units to save 5 minutes once a month, when you can already very easily clear the content with Asaria, Tamarin, Commander Lorena, and Arwell or Angel of Light. So, not very useful, and they're not usable anywhere else, really. Elena, Ida, Luluka, all 3 of these are just alternative units for that 4th slot in Nightmare Carcass. Bystander Hua Young is here for a very specific team. It's Bystander Hua Young plus Fene, can 2-man duo auto Nightmare Jewel. Researcher Carrot and Araminta are both replacements for Suthin. This is mostly for older players, really. If you already have them built, then they can replace Suthin. Or if you are just trying to do Archon and you haven't managed to roll Suthin yet, then Carrot's going to be the cheap replacement. Ace is a unit that probably should be down here, honestly. He is usable. He's just worse than all of the other options. Like, you can use him in Archon. He's got 2 bleeds on his S3. Worse than... where is he? Suthin. You can use him in Nightmare Vera. He's got, like, punch debuffs. He has, like, AoE Death Break. Kind of just worse than Ball. So, even though I think he is usable, it's not very high prio. So, yeah, down here, might belong down here. Kitty Clarissa is very good dual attacker. I just think that she is, like, not as necessary anymore because we have Camilla. We also used to use her with Terranor Guard, but you can't use Kitty and Brieg together in Fire Expedition because that's 3 debuffs. So Camilla kind of took her job plus ADS. So Kitty is still down here, but she might have some use in some floors in Abyss. She might just be better than Camilla. Kara I went over earlier, just the worse option than Ken for Wyvern 13 one-shot, though she is more accessible. She also does require a lot more investment. Watcher Shuri is for Asmanic and Golem 13 one-shots with Straze. Asmanic 13 is super, super low prio content. And then Golem 13 is a bit higher, but it's not that hard to clear Golem and it's not that slow, so not a huge issue. We've also got Vildred, who is the slow Asmanic 13 clearer. And Asmanic 13, you don't really want to clear that much. Plus, Mercedes does a good enough job. He's just the best in slot for slow clearing. The BBK is probably the best Asthmatic 13 one-shot AoE clearer, but Asthmatic 13 one-shot. And then we have the Y tier. We'll go over these very quickly. Kayn, usable in Nightmare Vera, worse than Asphon. Lilius, usable in Nightmare Vera. She's actually not bad. S1 force duel every single turn is pretty strong. It's just the teams that we can use already don't really require her. Maid Chloe, I mean, she attack buffs and she kind of heals, but why would you use her when there are so many other better healers? The one slot I think she's okay is probably Nightmare Archon, but you can just use Doris or Arcades. Zahhak, Young Senya, and Landy, all three of these are just potential DPS for Nightmare Jewel Leaf. Maybe these three deserve to be up here, just because the Nightmare Jewel Leaf DPS are kind of all 5 stars. So these three might deserve to be up here, honestly, or maybe even up here. But they're not really like, yeah, I would, because of like their rarity, like Landy limited, I'd much rather just have Gala, and then Zahhak 5-star, I'd rather use Celine. And then Young Senya is, I mean, good for other reasons, but mostly just PvP. Victorica is a unit where, is she usable? Yeah. You can use her in Golem, not needed at all. Tamarin, Ross, Mercedes, Sirmia already easily clears Golem. You could use her in Fire Expedition. Is it really necessary? Not really, just use Ross, it's good enough. Ram, she is, like, the baseline for Banshee 13 one-shot. She does worse damage than Verdant Adden. Verdant Adden is better at one-shotting Banshee than Ram. And then for Ice Expedition, like I said, Fenny can do it now, so not really any point in using Ram. Charles and Pavel are for Banshee 13 clearing Wave 1 faster. I don't think that's important. Just use Vivian. Viken used to be the best Banshee 13 one-shotter, now she's second best. Yufine is the best now, and I've also said that Straze and Blona can one-shot Banshee 13 fine. It's not that hard, especially with the gear we get now, so no reason to use Viken. Ervel and Giselle are just both worse Banshee 13 one-shotters than the other units I've mentioned. Giselle was actually pretty good in Nightmare Jewel Leaf. It's just, well, we're never getting Aespa back, and also there's not really much of a reason to use her. Rizid is one of the only units in the game, or one of the only units in the game that genuinely griefs your account, because his specialty change costs 30 powder. You are psychopathic if you try to finish a specialty change. Worst unit in the game, just because he actively takes resources from you, like as a 3-star. So, horrifying unit. Used to be used in Ice Expedition. Loka took his job, and even Inos is better now. Champ Z, I honestly don't even know why I have him here. These two, there's like this like Reddit post had this like Nightmare Queen one-shot. We're not building units for that. And then Luna, I went over, I didn't go over her. She is a Fire Expedition DPS, but Commander Lorena and Brieg, and also Terran Norgard. Not Brieg. Commander Lorena, Terran Norgard, and Fene. These three are all just better than her, so no point. And then Rose, power crept by Brieg. She has taken, or she is just worse than him everywhere. Lena, AoE one-shotter with the reset similar to Free Spirit Tierra and Arbiter. Worse than both of them. Angelica, we literally only use until we get Brieg. Definitely worth a mention just because we do use her, but you put her in Grates of Growth, take her out once you get Brieg, and you're done. Kyrus, Shuri are Abyss units. You use them for a couple of floors in Abyss, and that's about it. Izzy, also kind of just an Abyss unit. Then Chenille is one of the one-time use units. If you have him, pop him in Grace of Growth, he'll clear your Banshee missions for you. Besides that, nothing really. And then we have the Ancient Inheritance tier. These are just a bunch of units that only really exist in Ancient Inheritance. Outside of Ancient Inheritance, they're pretty much useless in PvE. So that is pretty much the entire tier list for PvE. Like, a lot of units are definitely usable in other places. Because PvE isn't that hard, you can definitely force a lot of units into specific spots. Like, if I really wanted to, I could use ML Hwayoung in a lot of places. But it's like, in terms of looking at what units are actually good in their spots, it's going to be these ones, I would say. Anyways, hopefully this helps out anybody who was looking at PvE stuff and how good units are. It's definitely a bit, like, subjective into what content you value. Like, I value being able to one-shot expeditions pretty highly just because it saves you energy, and then if you're somebody like me who just gambles and prays that somebody is going to actually give us, or is actually going to hit the poster, sometimes my posters just fail, so being able to one-shot is really nice. Being able to do any sort of respectable damage on expeditions is also very, very important, which is why I have these units up here. Something like clearing Nightmare Raid for the first time is much more important than being able to auto it. Like, I don't think autoing it is very valuable at all. It's 5 minutes once a month. Your entire Nightmare Raid of your entire time spent manualing a Nightmare Raid is not going to pass like half an hour once a month, so. But yeah, that's it.